Imagine a 225-pound hammer breaking tackles at the goal line, short yardage situations, with two explosive playmakers threatening to score anytime they get the chance to touch the football. Well, that's exactly what Kansas State's 2025 backfield is going to look like this season. But will offensive coordinator Matt Wells actually unleash this group to its full potential? Let's break it down right here on Locked On Kansas State.
You are Locked On Kansas State, your daily podcast on the Kansas State Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Kansas State, your daily Kansas State Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Christian Rao, and thank you so much for making Locked On Kansas State your first listen every single day. Before we dive into today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. It's an exciting episode for you to get into today because we're diving a little deep, but it's something that could be certainly realistic in the season upcoming for Kansas State, which I think is going to be a very successful season for the Wildcats. Today, we're diving into why the Wildcats running back room might be the key to winning the Big 12 in 2025. One, why Antonio Martin, the third running back on the roster, could become a short yardage secret weapon. And I think that is going to be an absolute hit for Kansas State, especially when you talk about all the other weapons and aspects and factors coming into this new offense. Of course, how Dylan Edwards and Joe Jackson form an explosive duo, thunder and lightning, or is it really lightning and lightning? We'll talk about that and whether Matt Wells will utilize them correctly in Kansas State's championship push. We are going to finish also with a little outlook on some of the other top running backs, the top running back rooms in the conference. So drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to know your thoughts, of course. Who will lead Kansas State in rushing touchdowns this season? It sounds like it could be an easy idea to say Dylan Edwards, but is it? Is it? For rushing touchdowns? I want to know your thoughts. Let's get into it here. And the reason I asked that question, and of course, Dylan Edwards is running back one. We're going to dive into that in the second segment. But I want to start with today's episode with talking about Antonio Martin. He is coming over from Southern Louisiana, and it's just such an interesting move for him. Last year, 1,228 yards, 11 touchdowns, and over 200 carries. And the reason I bring up those 200 carries because last season, DJ Giddens was that guy for us. Now, I'm not saying Antonio Martin is going to be the next DJ Giddens, but Kansas State has to find a way between these three running backs, most likely. And then there could be others that step up in fall camp. And I hope that happens. Competition means this team gets better. But DJ Giddens last year, just a nice snapshot and a good thing to remember. He rushed for over 1,300 yards, had 7 touchdowns, averaged over 6.5 yards a clip, 6.6 to be exact, but that was on 205 carries. You have to replace 205 carries on this roster heading into Dublin starting week 0. You also do have to add in some receiving as well. DJ Giddens wasn't shy from being a part of the receiving team. He actually had 21 receptions. And if you want to put that in retrospect, he had the 4th most receptions on the team last year. Just one behind Oakley for 3rd. So that's something to keep in mind as well. You have to replace a lot of rushing attempts and a decent amount of receptions out of the backfield. Will Antonio Martin be that guy for all of them? No, I don't think so. But I think he's going to be a very valuable piece for Kansas State heading into the new season. Here's why. 5'9", 222-pound power back. I've heard that that's actually going up a little bit as well, the weight. He does have 2 years of eligibility as well. So there's a lot of fun aspects that you can build into developing him. K-State needed a physical short yardage back after DJ Giddens. They needed that. And Giddens wasn't just a short yardage back. But when you look at the other running backs on the roster, that was obviously what was missing out of that room. And the Gabe Ervin experiment, if you will, it kind of fizzled out. There looks like some kind of medical issues that he just couldn't overcome. Gabe Ervin came over from Nebraska in the transfer portal, the first portal, and it sounds like it's just not working. I think he is medically retiring. If I do if that's the right lingo for what he is going to do with the remainder of his football career moving forward with his life. But bringing in Antonio Martin brings toughness, it brings durability, and for a lack of better term, because I've heard this a couple other times as well, calling him the thick one, it brings thickness to the running back room that is full of explosive but lighter running backs. In a Big 12 conference where parity from top to bottom is arguably the best, where the best team that won it all last year was projected to finish last in the conference. When we talk about how we felt as a team last year after starting 7-1 and then finishing the season the way we did, a lot of those reasons was because of injuries that happened towards the end of the season. Depth is going to be a huge role when it comes to making sure you not only find yourself in contention for the Big 12 championship, but find yourself potentially winning it and getting to the college football playoffs. He could quietly become a major piece, especially if Jackson's inconsistency or Edwards' lighter frame limits them. We're going to talk about in just a second. But the potential to me is 8 to 10 short yardage touchdowns. Like I'm talking red zone touchdowns, consistent red zone hammers, late game clock killers. I absolutely love the idea of having Antonio Martin be the dude for Kansas State running back. In a season where we had 21 touchdowns, rushing touchdowns last season, I do see that the potential for 8 to 10 from our third running back when you have him as a potential specialist in the red zone or short yard situations. So am I wrong to think that? Can you think or maybe see Antonio Martin getting 8 to 10 rushing touchdowns for Kansas State in 2025? I mean, consistent red zone hammer, as I mentioned, late game clock killer as well. Not only those 8 to 10 touchdowns, but I'm looking at trying to replace those 205 carries. It wouldn't shock me to put, and where's your over under? I'm going to say at least 50 carries from Antonio Martin in 2025. I think 50 would be a great thing for trying to make sure that you keep Dylan Edwards and Joe Jackson healthy, and you push. 50 might even be too low. I think the more that you keep it evened out between the three of those running backs, the better chance we have going farther this season. Antonio Martin isn't here to be flashy. Okay. He's here to finish drives. That's exactly what I see his role in 2025. And that might be exactly what Kansas State needs to win the Big 12 championship for the first time since 2022. Let's dive into more of this running back room. Dylan Edwards and Joe Jackson. Are they thunder and lightning, or are they actually lightning and lightning? Let's talk about that next, right here on Locked On Kansas State. But before we do so, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golfing on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game more exciting. You are already following the action, so why not make it a little more thrilling with FanDuel? You can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned on the beach. I've been using FanDuel to track my favorite matchups, and the app keeps me fresh with newly daily promotions. That's so cool, that app feature of the promotions, and a fun way to bet. It gives you some ideas. If you're not truly paying attention to those sports in the summer, this is like that down window of sports, if you will. Those daily promotions kind of keeps it nice and fresh, and I love that. So whether I'm placing a same-game parlay, watching a bet to ride on into the ninth inning, FanDuel makes it feel like I'm part of the action. So if you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5. And with that $5, you can get $150 in bonus bets if that first bet wins. So open FanDuel's app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. It's a fun time. Check out FanDuel today. Thunder and lightning, or is it really lightning and lightning? That's the question I have to ask you about Kansas State's 1-2 punch in the running back room. That's Dylan Edwards and Joe Jackson, and maybe we have lightning striking 3 times with a little bit of thunder rolls when it comes to Antonio Martin, as we just mentioned earlier in this segment. Hey, they're coming out with a second segment of the movie, Days of Thunder, so maybe it's a perfect time for Antonio Martin. But the biggest question here is, what should we expect from Dylan Edwards and Joe Jackson in 2025? Dylan Edwards, obviously track speed. I mean, that is the first thing that comes to mind when you think of this guy. He's so fast. He's so electric. he's so exciting. We got to see it, just a small idea of it last season. We saw it on special teams as well. And then we got a really good snapshot of what we were going to get from Dylan Edwards in the bowl game. I had such a good time watching him against Rutgers. 18 carries, 196 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Every time he touched the ball, he just was an absolute threat. Averaged almost 11 yards a carry in that bowl game, had a 65-yard rush in that one as well. There was just a lot of exciting things to love about Dylan Edwards' game. And of course, you're going to have a little bit of recency bias when you talk about the most recent time you saw Dylan Edwards on the field, but I think it's a lot more important to think about just that game, because who was the guy that was calling the plays? And that was Matt Wells. And Matt Wells is going to be the dude in 2025. And Dylan Edwards is going to be that dude for Kansas State's running back room. He's an all-purpose weapon. Not only are we going to see 196 rushing yards, we're going to see him with some receptions. We talked about earlier in this episode how DJ Giddens had 21 receptions, led the running back room, and was 4th on the roster when it came to receptions. Well, last year we got 19 receptions from Dylan Edwards. So you can expect and assume and make sure that you are ready to go that those receptions are going to go up. It would not shock me if Dylan Edwards is second on the team in receptions. I hope that's not the case, because that means we probably have a step back in the wide receiver room, and we have more of a question mark about some of those other kind of conversations that we've had for a couple of years, especially when it comes to transfer portal wide receivers. But it wouldn't shock me. I do think we are going to see 30, 35, even potentially 40 receptions for Dylan Edwards this season, because they're not going to use him just out of the backfield. They're going to put him in the slot. They're going to utilize him for screens. They're going to utilize him for wide receiver screens as well, not just those halfback screens you see out of the backfield. He is an all-purpose weapon. You can line him up wide, catch passes. He can rip chunk runs off tackle, jet sweeps, you name it. There's a reason he was the Rate Bowl MVP against Rutgers, and I think he's going to be one of the best running backs in not just Kansas State's backfield, but in the Big 12 as well. Will we see him be an award-type winning running back? That might actually be an issue, not because of his performance, but because of what I mentioned in the first segment. I could see some of his stats and some of the stats that writers and award voters love, like touchdowns, get taken away from him. He might be the guy that gets you those big flashy plays, but at the end of the day, Antonio Martin might be the one driving it in. Needless to say, I still think that we're going to see him break 15 touchdowns. Now, I'm going to say not 15 rushing touchdowns. I'm going to call it 15 total touchdowns in this one, because I do think he's going to be all over the place. I think he has an insurance for the wide receiver group if they underperform, or if Joe Jackson, which we're going to talk about in just a minute, has some struggles, obviously some medical issues, some injuries in the past. So overall, I think Dylan Edwards still becomes the most important running back on this roster. I don't think there's anything to take away from that. However, if we're going to talk about potential, preseason all running backs, I find it hard to give the nod to Dylan Edwards, because I think the entire group of running backs that Kansas State has is just a dynamic group, and maybe not one sticks out enough to be given an award. I hope that makes a lot of sense. It doesn't take away from the fact of how special DE is and how special he's going to be to help Kansas State get them to the Big 12 title game this season. As for Joe Jackson, well, the change of pace with burst and receiving upside as well is going to help Kansas State as he moves up from running back 3 to running back 2 on the roster. But he's still young, he's still unproven, and he's battled injuries. And that's a big deal, obviously, if you're taking a bigger role on the roster. Last year only had 39 carries for 227 yards. When he touched the rock, he did great things. 5.8 yards per carry. He had a 32-yard rush. He only scored once out of the rushing side of it. He did have one receiving. He didn't. He did have He did have one receiving touchdown, but it was only on 6 receptions for 63 yards. So you need a big upside and a big kind of expectation for Joe Jackson in 2025. What will that be? Well, if it's anything like we saw in the bowl game, I think you have some exciting things to look forward to. In the bowl game, he had 7 rushes for 50 yards. He averaged 7 yards a clip, had a 16-yard rush, and that was on the backside of what Dylan Edwards was doing. That 1-2 punch is why I said thunder and lightning, but with his quickness as well. He's not as quick as Dylan Edwards, so some people like to call him the bigger running back in the room. I don't know if they're going to do that anymore now that Antonio Martin is in the mix, but with his type of speed and receiving upside and the ability for him to go either inside the guard or off tackle running as well, I do think that this is more of a lightning situation rather than that thunder and lightning that we were recently discussing in December after the Rape Bowl. I think this running back room is going to be so dang good, folks. I really do. Every single piece of this offense, from quarterback to running back, wide receiver, tight end, and offensive line, is completely set up the way you would love it to be to make not only a Big 12 title run, but a deep run in the college football playoffs. That's how bold I think this offense is this season for year 2 under Avery Johnson as the starting quarterback. And we just led the show off with the potential running back 3 on the roster and how I think he might score 10 touchdowns. Like, that is incredible. That's how exciting I think this offense can be. And I think there is actually a very strong potential that those things come to life. The potential to develop into a high efficiency running back for Joe Jackson is super high as well. If he stays healthy, he's going to complement Dylan Edwards perfectly. He is going to complement Dylan Edwards perfectly. And neither are true 20-plus carry bell cows, if you will. And I don't know if you have to. With the 3 running backs on the roster, I don't know if we get any of them past 20-plus carries a game. I don't know. I don't think that happens. Maybe, if anything, maybe Jackson gets it because they're trying to rush the clock, or Antonio Martin gets a lot. I can see each Joe Jackson and Dylan Edwards with 15 carries apiece, and then you see maybe 7 or 8 from Antonio Martin. And I think you still find a way to get 200-plus rushing yards a game. That's huge. Both need to hit home runs or limit touches rather than volume, in my opinion. I see both of these players, when we talk about Dylan Edwards and Joe Jackson, being the ones that, as soon as they touch the rock, can score from the other side of the field. Dylan Edwards obviously has the ability to do that. And I imagine that there's going to be at least 2 to 3 rushes, and I actually predicted one of them, to happen week 0 in Dublin. At least 3 rushes this year from Dylan Edwards will go over 50 yards. Mark it down. That's going to happen. Martin's addition for these two allow Edwards and Jackson to stay fresh, which is huge, especially with Joe Jackson, and effective in their niche roles. Now, look, Dylan Edwards, smaller running back. We talk about Joe Jackson's injuries, but I think it would be ignorant for us not to talk about the fact that we're giving Dylan Edwards the keys to be running back 1. With that size, are you nervous at all about his longevity on the season? I think you have to. I think you have to have just a little bit of, I don't know if fear is the right word, but concern. I think you have to. And I think the coaching staff also has that in mind, and that's also why they know that Joe Jackson's there, and they also brought in a guy like Antonio Martin, who had over 200 carries just last season. A workhorse, if you will. Edwards brings the fireworks, Jackson adds the spark, and together they can stretch any defense thin if used correctly. Super excited about this running back room, but it all won't matter unless offensive coordinator Matt Wells uses this room correctly. Will he? That's the biggest question that we have entering this season for this group, and we'll try and answer it next, right here on Locked On Kansas State. The main challenge for this roster when it comes to the running back room for Kansas State is Matt Wells. And obviously, Matt Wells has great head coaching experience. We talk about it all the time, what he did at Utah State, moving Jordan Love to being an NFL-ready quarterback. He has Big 12 head coaching experience as well, what he's done at Texas Tech in the past. He's technically entering year 2 at Kansas State, but year 1 as the dude, as the macho man, as offensive coordinator, the only offensive coordinator for Avery Johnson. The challenge is for Matt Wells to get the balance of Avery Johnson's air attack with effective running back usage and slide in a little bit of dual threat Avery Johnson in there as well. It's going to be interesting if he can do that. I think he's going to have some struggles at first, and I don't mean to remind you folks, but You can't. You can't have those struggles right away because you're not playing an FCS school right off the bat. You're not playing a gimme cupcake school like some other teams do right off the bat. No, you are going overseas. You are heading to Dublin, and you're taking on a Big 12 rival, arguably your biggest rival, right off the bat to open up the college football season in Iowa State. You lose that game, the wheels could easily fall off right away. It could. Not, I don't think it happens, but I don't want to be in that situation to even give us the opportunity to let the wheels fall off. I want those lug nuts on nice and tight after leaving 1-0 in Dublin. I think the biggest issue for Matt Wells right off the bat will be for him to avoid predictability. Because I can predict, at least have a good idea of what I think the running back room is going to look like. If I, on the podcast of Locked On Kansas State, who brings you Kansas State Wildcats coverage every single day, your team every day, can talk about this, then I'm sure defensive coordinators can do the same thing. When I'm thinking Antonio Martin, I'm thinking power. When I'm thinking Dylan Edwards, I'm thinking speed and receiving, and who knows where you put him on the field. But I'm thinking something deep threat. I'm thinking something outside the tackle. I'm not thinking inside guard game. Not thinking that for Dylan Edwards, especially early on in the season when you're hoping to make sure that he's ready to go in week 12 and Big 12 championship and college football playoffs. You're not hoping that he's banged up. So you need to find a way to disguise those tendencies so any defenses can keep key personnel off the field. If you have Antonio Martin on the field, you don't want them to have 10 and 11, 12 in the box because you know that they're going to make some rushing. So hopefully Antonio Martin can maybe become one of the top pass blockers out of the running back room. I think that would help avoid predictability. You could utilize all your other big wide receivers, your amazing tight end room. Dylan Edwards could be outside in the slot if you wanted to bring Martin and Edwards out at the exact same time. I think that might be the best case scenario, personally. Now that we're saying this, that's the first time I've actually came to my mind. But if Antonio Martin could be the guy when it comes to pass blocking, and with his stature, with his size, makes a lot of sense, then I think that helps with those predictabilities. The key question is who becomes that pass protecting running back. And I think Antonio Martin could be the dude that could help that case. Joe Jackson would also be good as well because he does have some speed, a little bit more size than Dylan Edwards. And to add more of the predictability, you know that if he's out there on 3rd and 6, there's ability for a draw play. You might not give Antonio Martin the keys for a draw play on 3rd and 6 like you would for Joe Jackson. Edwards also must improve there to stay on the field in big moments. Now, I do think that in a third and long situation, if Dylan Edwards is on the field, he's probably not in the backfield. He's probably in the slot. I do think that's going to happen, but who knows? Maybe he does play in the backfield a little bit to limit some of that predictability. That is something that we are going to have to pay close attention to in Iowa State, against North Dakota, Army, Arizona, before we get to the true, and this is not a knock on Iowa State, but before we get to the true Big 12 schedule at the end of the season, the final 8 games of the year when we play nothing but Big 12 competition. Can Jackson handle more consistent work if Edwards needs to stay fresh? That's a big question. We'll see what happens. And will Martin's role expand if Jackson's health is a concern? Now, that could be a big issue. If Jackson's health once again becomes a concern, and all you have is Dylan Edwards and Antonio Martin, that could turn into a concern, especially with predictability, especially with longevity of Dylan Edwards exclusively. And that's something that we need to pay attention to yet again. I think in Iowa State, we're going to get a lot of great questions for this roster. No doubt. Hopefully it still ends with a win, but we're going to see what this roster is made of. Depth is going to be a big issue right off the bat. An issue where could be solved. Like this running back room has 3 solid players. We might get 4. We might get another player like, I don't know, Rice could step up in fall camp. We might be talking about him more, right? There's just a lot of other things that could pop up to be excited about. But here are 3 of my bold running back room predictions. I think Edwards rushes still for over 1,200 yards and total touchdowns, at least 15 total touchdowns if healthy. We don't get the DJ Giddens 1,300 plus rushing yards because I think the running back room is a lot more consistent. As I mentioned, I think Antonio Martin becomes the red zone hammer and scores 8 to 10 rushing touchdowns on the season. Love that. And I think Kansas State finishes top 5 in the country in red zone efficiency, averaging at least 5+ yards per catch as a unit, yards per carry, I should say, as a unit. Red zone efficiency is going to be huge. And I think Kansas State does it. They were great in the tight end room last year. I think the running back room takes a step up as well. Why does this all matter? Well, the running back room can take pressure off Avery Johnson. We didn't even get into him when it comes to the running back room because he's technically a running back on the field when he wants to be. This allows Kansas State to control the games, win in the trenches, opens up the play action that Matt Wells is dying for Avery Johnson to have. If Wells uses it correctly, it makes Kansas State's offense one of the most complete in the Big 12, and dare I say the country, folks. Dare I say the country. Avery Johnson's a dark horse candidate for the Heisman Trophy. His stats will look amazing if his running back room helps support him to open up the ability for him to step back in the pocket on play action, to get time for him to be able to throw Jace Brown a deep ball, or Jared Bradley, or Jane Tibbs, or Medford. There's a lot of exciting things happening in Kansas State. We just got to wait for it to happen starting on August 23rd in Dublin, Ireland. This group has the tools to help Kansas State win the Big 12 and make a playoff push. I'm not even talking about appearing in the college football playoffs. If this running back room can do what I think it can do, it's a playoff push team, folks. But only if Matt Wells unleashes them the way that he can do. We've seen it happen in the past. So this 2025 running back room might not feature a single superstar. We might not see it as a superstar. I like Dylan Edwards, but I don't know if he is like DJ Giddens type of level where we're talking about him potentially taking some solid carries for the Indianapolis Colts his rookie season. But together with Martin's power, Edwards' speed, Jackson's electricity, it could be the key to a Big 12 title run. If Matt Wells uses them right, it changes the ceiling for us 100%. So let me know your thoughts in the comments. Who's your breakout pick for this running back room? Is it Dylan Edwards still? Is it Joe Jackson? Is it Antonio Martin? Is it somebody else that I'm not talking about that needs more attention heading into fall camp? I'd love to hear that. Just one little slight thing to put it into perspective. I've seen some reports that have come out talking about some of the returning running backs. Dylan Edwards always makes the list across the Big 12. But I think if there's one other room, and this goes back to my narrative about this schedule, if there's one other room in the Big 12 that has the depth that we do, I think BYU's got some good stuff. There's obviously some other problems happening with BYU. But I think Baylor, yet again, Baylor might have the best running back room, or at least that can have a fight against, an argument against Kansas State heading into the new season. And Baylor's Bryson Washington is the only returning 1,000-yard running back in the league. Rushed for 1,028 yards, 12 touchdowns, just under 6 yards per carry last year. He was a freshman All-American, 4 consecutive 100-yard games. He's got massive upside. And then Dawson Pendergrass of Baylor is the second running back, and I think he's pretty elite as well. Had 671 yards and 6 touchdowns last year. With those two running backs, you could make the argument that Baylor returns one of the most formidable backfield duos in the Big 12. But I said 2. Kansas State's got 3. There's my argument right there. Another reason why I add Baylor as the scariest game for Kansas State in 2025. That game on the road in Waco, everything is going to have to click. We'll see what happens. Who's your favorite Big 12 running back room? Is it Kansas State? Do you think Baylor gets the nod? Is there somebody else I'm talking about? I think BYU's running back room's good. I think West Virginia's got a pretty good running back room. I just don't know if everything else clicks around that team in year one of Rich Rod returning back to the program. A lot of questions that happen for the Big 12 this year, and that's why this is the best conference in college football. We'll be back here tomorrow with more excellent coverage of Kansas State Wildcats. We're actually talking to Chris Level of Locked On Texas Tech, where we dive into a little bit of Texas Tech and Kansas State talk, because that game is going to be interesting, especially where it is on the schedule. Could be a season-defining game for both teams as we head into the second half of the season. Let me know your thoughts, as always, and thank you so much for listening. Please like the video. Please subscribe. And this has been Locked On Kansas State.